Storyling Radio now presents Kiss Me Again, Stranger by Daphne du Maurier.
My idea of having a good time then was to lie on my back in greasy overalls under a car's belly or a lorry's with a spanner in my hand and working on some old bolt or screw with the smell of oil all about me and someone starting up an engine and the other chaps around clattering their tools and whistling. And me, I never minded the smell or the dirt. As my old mum used to say when I'd be that way as a kid, mucking about with a grease can. It won't hurt him, it's clean dirt. And so it is. Not with engines, anyway. The boss at the garage was a good fellow, easygoing, cheerful. He saw I was keen on my work. He wasn't much of a mechanic himself, so he gave me all the repair jobs, which was just the way I liked it, really. Me, I didn't live with my old mum. She was too far off over Shepperton way. I saw no point in spending half the day getting to and from my work. I like to be handy, have it on the spot, as it were. So I had a bedroom with a couple called Thompson, only about 10 minutes' walk from the garage. Nice people at Thompson's, they were. He was in the shoe business, cobbler, I suppose he'd be called, and Mrs. Thompson, she cooked the meals and she kept the house for him over the shop. I used to eat with them, breakfast and supper. We always had a cooked supper. Being the only lodger, I was treated as family. Now, I'm one for routine, you see. I like to get on with the job, and then when the day's work's over, settle down to a paper, a smoke, a bit of music on the wireless, listen to a story or two, variety, something of that sort, and then turn in early. I never had much use for girls, not even when I was doing my time in the Army. I was out in the Middle East, too, Port Said and all that. No, I was happy. I was happy enough, anyway, living with the Thompsons, carrying on much the same day after day until that one night when it happened. Yeah, it happened. Nothing's been the same, neither, nor ever will be. I don't know. The Thompsons had gone to see their married daughter up at Highgate, you see. They asked me if I'd like to go along, but somehow I didn't fancy barging in, so instead of staying home alone after leaving the garage, I went down to the picture palace, taking a look at the poster, saw it was a cowboy and Indian stuff. There was a picture of a cowboy sticking a knife into an Indian's guts. I liked that. Proper baby I am for westerns. So I paid my 1 and 2 pence and I went inside. I handed my slip of paper to the usherette and said, "Back row, please," because I like sitting far back and leaning my head against the board, Well, then I saw her. They dress the girls up no end in some of these places, velvet tams and all, making them proper guys. Yeah, but they hadn't made a guy out of this one, though. She had copper hair, all right, page boy style, I think they call it, and the bluest eyes. The kind that look short-sighted but see further than you think. They go dark by night, nearly black, and her mouth was sulky looking as if she was fed up. It would take someone giving her the world to make her smile. She hadn't any freckles, nor milky skin, but warmer than that, more like a peach, and natural, too. She was small and slim. Her velvet coat, blue it was, fitted her close, and the cap on the back of her head showed up her copper hair. And I bought me a program. Not that I wanted one, but to delay going in through the curtain, and I said to her, "Hey, so what's the picture like?" Yeah, she didn't look at me. She just went on staring into nothing at the opposite wall. "Knifing's amateur, but you can always sleep." I couldn't help laughing. I could see she was serious, though. She wasn't trying to have me on or anything. "Well, that's no advertisement," I said. "What if the manager heard you?" And then she looked at me. She turned those bluest of blue eyes in my direction. Still fed up they were, not interested. But there was something in those blue eyes that I had not seen before, and I've never seen it since. Kind of laziness, like someone waking from a long dream and glad to find that you're there. Cat's eyes have that gleam sometimes when you stroke them, and they purr and they curl themselves into a ball and they let you do anything you want. She looked at me this way a moment. There was a smile lurking somewhere behind her mouth if you gave it a chance. And tearing my slip of paper in half, she said, "I'm not paid to advertise. I'm paid to look like this and to lure you inside." She drew aside the curtains and flashed her torch in the darkness. I couldn't see a thing. It was pitch black, like it always is the first time until you get used to it and begin to make out the shapes of the other people sitting there. But there were two great heads on the screen, and some chap saying to another one, "If you don't come clean, I'll put a bullet right through you." And someone broke a pane of glass, and a woman screamed. "That looks all right to me," I said. I began groping for somewhere to sit. She said, "Yeah, this isn't the picture. It's the trailer for next week." She flicked on her torch, and she showed me a seat in the back row, one away from the gangway. I sat through the advertisements and the newsreel, and then some chap came and played the organ, and the colors of the curtain over the screen went purple and gold and green. Funny, I suppose they think they have to give you your money's worth. Looking around, I saw the house was half empty, and I guess the girl had been right. The big picture wasn't going to be much, and that's why nobody much was there. Just before the hall went dark again, she came sauntering down the aisle. She had a tray of ice creams, but she didn't even bother to call them out and try and sell them. She could have been walking in her sleep. So she went up the other aisle. I beckoned to her. "You got a sixpenny one?" I said. She looked across at me. I might have been something dead under her feet. But then she must have recognized me, because with that half smile came back again, the lazy look in the eye. She walked around the back of the seats to me. "Wafer or cornet?" she said. Well, I didn't want either, to tell the truth. I just wanted to buy something from her and keep her talking to me. "Well, which do you recommend?" I asked. She shrugged her shoulders. Cornets last longer." And she put one in my hand before I had time to give her my choice. "How about one for you, too?" I said. "No, thanks. I saw them made." And then she walked off, and the place went dark. And there I was, sitting with a great sixpenny cornet in my hand, looking like a fool. The damn thing slopped all over the edge of the holder, spilling onto my shirt, and I had to ram the frozen stuff in my mouth as quick as I could for fear it would go all over my knees. And I turned sideways because someone came and sat in the empty seat beside the gangway. I finished it at last. I cleaned myself up with my pocket handkerchief and then concentrated on the story flashing across the screen. It was a Western, all right. Carts lumbering over prairies, a train full of bullion being held to ransom, and the heroine in breeches one moment and full evening dress the next. Yeah, that's the way pictures should be. Not a bit like real life at all. But as I watched the story, I began to notice the whiff of a scent in the air. I didn't know what it was or where it came from, but it was there just the same. Now, there was a man to the right of me, and on my left were two empty seats, and it certainly wasn't the people in front, and I couldn't keep turning around and sniffing. Now, I'm not a great one for liking scent, you understand. It's too often cheap and nasty. But this scent was different. There was nothing stale about it, or stuffy, or strong. It was like the flowers they sell up in the West End in the big flower shops before you get them on the barrows, a three-bob a bloom sort of touch. Rich chaps buy them for actresses and such. And it was so darn good. The smell of it there, in that murky old picture palace full of cigarette smoke, that it nearly drove me mad. At last I turned right around in my seat, and I spotted where it came from. It came from the girl, the usherette. She was leaning on the backboard behind me, her arms folded across it. "Don't fidget. You're wasting 1 and 2 pence. Watch the screen." But not out loud, so that anyone could hear. In a whisper, from me alone, she said it. I couldn't help laughing at myself. The cheek of it. I knew where the scent came from now, and somehow it made me enjoy the picture more. It was as though she was beside me in one of the empty seats, and we were, looking at the story together. When it was over and the lights went on, I saw I'd sat through the last showing, and it was nearly 10. Everyone was clearing off for the night, so I waited a bit. And then she came down with her torch and started squinting under the seats to see if anybody had dropped a glove or a purse. The way they do, and only remember about afterwards when they get home. And she took no more notice of me than if I'd been a rag which no one would bother to pick up. Oh, well, I stood up in the back row, alone. The house was clear now. When she came to me and she said, "Move over, you're blocking the gangway." And she flashed about her with her torch. There was nothing there, only an empty pack of players which the cleaners would throw away in the morning. Then she straightened herself and looked me up and down, taking off the ridiculous cap from the back of her head that suited her so well she fanned herself with it and said, "So what, you sleeping here tonight?" And then went off, whistling under her breath, and disappeared through the curtains. Well, I'll tell you, it was proper maddening. I'd never been taken so much with a girl in all my life. I went into the vestibule after her, but she had gone through a door to the back behind the box office palace, and the commissionaire chap was already getting the doors to fix them for the night, I went out and I stood in the street and waited. I felt a bit of a fool, all right, because the odds were that she would come out with a bunch of the others, the way girls do. There was the one who sold me the ticket. I dare say there were other usherettes up the balconies, and perhaps a cloakroom attendant too, and they'd all be giggling together, and I wouldn't have the nerve to go up to her. In a few minutes, though, she came swinging out of the place, alone. She had a mac on, belted, and her hands in her pockets, and she had no hat. By Mac, I don't mean a computer you guys use nowadays. I mean one of those trench coats we used to wear back in my day when this story is set. A Mac, She walked straight up the street, and she didn't look to right or left of her. I followed, scared she would turn around and see me off. But she went on walking, fast and direct, staring straight in front of her. And as she moved, her copper pageboy hair swung with her shoulders. Presently, the girl hesitated, and then she crossed over and stood waiting for a bus. There was a queue of, 4 or 5 people, so she didn't see me join the queue. When the bus came, she climbed onto it ahead of the others, and I climbed too, without the slightest notion where it was going, and I couldn't have cared less. Up the stairs she went, with me after her. Settled herself in the back seat, yawning, closed her eyes. I sat myself down beside her, nervous as a kitten, I tell you. The point being that I never did that sort of thing as a rule, and I expected a rocket. And when the conductor stumped up and asked for fares, I said, 2 sixpennies, please, because I reckoned she would never be going the whole distance, and this would be bound to cover her fare and mine too. He raised his eyebrows. They'd like to think themselves smart, some of these fellows, and he said, "Look out for the bumps when the driver changes gears, right? He's only just passed his test." And he went down the stairs chuckling, telling himself he was no end of a wag, no doubt. The sound of his voice woke the girl, and she looked at me out of her sleepy eyes. She looked, too, at the tickets in my hand. She must have seen by the color they were 6 pennies, and she smiled. The first real smile I'd got out of her that evening, and said without any sort of surprise at all, "Well, hello, stranger." I took out a cigarette to put myself at ease. I offered her one, but she wouldn't take it. She just closed her eyes again to settle herself to sleep. Then, seeing there was no one else to notice up at the top deck, only an Air Force chap in the front slopped over a newspaper, I put out my hand and I pulled her head down on my shoulder. I got my arm round her, snug and comfortable, thinking, of course, she'd throw it off and blast me to hell. She didn't, though. She gave a sort of little laugh to herself, and then she settled down like as if she might have been in an armchair. And she said, "Well, it's not every night I get a free ride and a free pillow. Wake me at the bottom of the hill, all right, before we get to the cemetery." Now, I tell you, I've never been on this bus. I've never been on this route. I didn't know what hill she meant or what cemetery. Yeah, but I wasn't going to wake her. Well, not me. I paid for 2 sixpennies, and I was darn well going to get value for my money. So we sat there together, jogging along in the bus, very close, very pleasant. I thought to myself that it's a lot more fun than sitting at home in the bed, reading the football news, or spending an evening up at Highgate at Mr. and Mrs. Thompson's daughter's place. So presently I got more daring. I let my head lean against hers. I tightened up my arm a bit, not too obvious-like, but nicely. Anyone coming up the stairs to the top deck would have taken us for a courting couple. And then, after we had about 4 pennyworth, I got anxious. The old bus wouldn't be turning around and going back again. When we reached the 6 penny limit, it would pack up for the night, and we'd have come to the terminus. And there we'd be, the girl and me, stuck out somewhere at the back of beyond with no return bus, and I got about $6 in my pocket, no more. $6 would never pay for a taxi, not with a tip and all. Besides, there probably wouldn't be any taxis going. Ah, hell, what a fool I'd been not to come out with more money. It was silly, perhaps, to let it worry me. But I'd acted on impulse right from the start, and if only I'd known how the evening was going to turn out, I'd have had my wallet filled, I'll tell you that. It wasn't often I went out with a girl. And I hate a fellow who can't do the things in style. A proper slap-up do at the corner house. They're good these days with that help-yourself service. If she had a fancy for something stronger than coffee or orangeade, well, of course, as late as this, there wasn't much use, but near home, I knew where to go. Though there was a pub where my boss went, and you paid for your gin and kept it there. You could go in and have a drink from your bottle whenever you felt like it. They have the same sort of racket at the posh nightclubs up west, I'm told. But they make you pay through the nose for it. Anyway, here I was, riding a bus to Lord knows where, with my girl beside me. Yeah, I called her my girl, just as if she really was, and we were courting, and blessed me if I had the money to take her home. I began to fidget about from sheer nerves, and I fumbled in one pocket after another, in case by piece of luck I should come across a half-crown or even a 10-bob note. And maybe I'd forgotten all about it. You know the way it is. And I suppose I disturbed her with all this, because she suddenly pulled my ear and said, "Stop rocking the boat." Well, it just got me. I can't explain why. She held my ear for a moment before she pulled it, like as though she were feeling the skin and liked it. Then she just gave it a lazy tug. It's the kind of thing anyone would do to a child, and the way she said it is as if she had known me for years and we were out picnicking together. "Stop rocking the boat," she said. Chubby, matey, yet better than either. Look here. I'm awfully sorry. I've been and done a darn silly thing. You see, I took tickets to the terminus because I wanted to sit beside you. You understand? When we get there, we'll be turned out of the bus. It'll be miles from anywhere, and I've only got $6 in my pocket. You've got legs, haven't you? What do you mean I've got legs? They're meant to walk on. Mine were. And that was the only answer she'd give me. And then I knew it didn't matter. She wasn't angry at me, and the evening was going to be all right. I cheered up in a second, gave her a squeeze just to show I appreciated her being a sport. Most girls would have tore me to shreds, and I said, We haven't passed a cemetery, as far as I know. Does it matter very much?" "Oh, there'll be others. I'm not particular about which one." And I didn't know what to make of that. I thought she wanted to get out at the cemetery stopping point because it was nearest her stop for her home, like the way you say, "Put me down at Woolsworth's if you live handy." I puzzled it over for a bit, and I said, "How do you mean there'll be others? It's not the thing you see often along a bus route." "I was speaking in general terms. Don't bother to talk. I like you silent best." Now, it wasn't a slap in the face, the way she said it. Fact was, I knew what she meant. Talking's all very pleasant with people like Mr. and Mrs. Thompson over supper, and you say how the day was, and one of you reads a bit out of the paper, the other says, "Fancy there now." And so it goes on in bits and pieces until one of you yawns and somebody says, "Who's for bed?" Oh, yeah, it's nice enough with a chap like the boss having a cup of mid-morning, about 3 when there's nothing doing. I'll tell you what I think. Those blokes in the government are make a mess of things, no better than last lot. And then we'll be interrupted with someone going to fill up with petrol. And I like talking to my old mum when I go and see her, which, well, I don't do often enough, God knows. And she tells me how she spanked my bottom when I was a kid, and I sit at the kitchen table like I did then, and she bakes rock cakes and gives me peel and saying, "You always were one for the peel, dear." That's talk. That's conversation. Yeah, but I didn't want to talk to my girl. I just wanted to keep my arm around her the way I was doing, rest my chin against her head. That's what she meant when she said she liked me silent. Yeah, I like it too. One last thing bothered me a bit, though, and that was whether I could kiss her before the bus stopped and we turned out at the terminus. Now, I mean, putting an arm around a girl is one thing. Kissing her is another. It takes a little time as a rule to warm up. You start off with a long evening ahead of you. By the time you've been to a picture or a concert and then had something to eat and a drink, well, you got yourselves acquainted. It's the usual thing to end up with a bit of kissing and a cuddle. The girls expect it, you know. Truth to tell, I was never much of one for kissing. Well, there was a girl I walked out with back home before I went into the army. She was quite a good sort. I liked her, but her teeth are a bit prominent, you know. Even if you shut your eyes and tried to forget who it was you were kissing, well, you knew it was her, and there was nothing to it. Good old Doris from next door. But the opposite kind are even worse. The ones that grab you and nearly eat you. You come across plenty of them when you're in uniform. They're much too eager, and they muss you about, and you get the feeling they can't wait for a chap to get busy about them, you know? I don't mind saying they used to make me sick. Put me dead off, and that's a fact. I suppose I was born fussy. I don't know. But now, this evening, in this bus, it was all quite different. I don't know what it was about the girl. The sleepy eyes, the copper hair, and somehow not seeming to care if I was there, yet liking me at the same time. I hadn't found anything like this before, and so I says to myself, now shall I risk it or shall I wait? And I knew from the way the driver was going and the conductor was whistling below and saying good night to the people getting off, the final stop couldn't be far away, and my heart began to thump under my coat, and my neck grew hot below the collar. Darn silly, only a kiss, you know. She couldn't kill me. And then, well, it was like diving off a springboard. I thought, here goes. And I bent down and I turned her face to me, and I lifted her chin with my hand and I kissed her, good and proper. Well, if I was poetical, I'd say what happened then was a revelation. But I'm not poetical, and I can only say that, well, she kissed me back. And it lasted a long time. And it wasn't a bit like Doris. Then the bus stopped with a jerk, and the conductor called out in a sing-song voice, "All out, please!" Frankly, I could have wrung his neck. She gave me a kick on the ankle. "Come on, move," she said. And I stumbled from my seat and I racketed down the stairs. She followed behind, and there we were, standing in the street. It was beginning to rain, too, not badly, but just enough to make you notice and want to turn up the collar of your coat. And if we were right at the end of the great wide street with the deserted, unlighted shops on either end, the end of the world, it looked to me. And sure enough, there was a hill over to the left. At the bottom of the hill, there was a cemetery. I could see the railings and the white tombstones behind. They stretched a long way, nearly halfway up the hill. There were acres of it. "God darn it," I said. "Is this the place you meant?" "Could be," she said, looking over her shoulder vaguely, and then she took my arm. "What about a cup of coffee first, huh?" First. Cup of coffee first. I wonder if she meant before the long trudge home, or was this home? Well, it didn't really matter. It wasn't much after 11, and I could do with a cup of coffee, a sandwich, too. There was a stall across the road. They hadn't shut up shop. So we walked over to it, my girl and me. And the driver was there, too, and the conductor, and the Air Force fellow who had been up front on the top deck. They were ordering cups of tea, sandwiches, and we had the same, only coffee. They cut them tasty at the stalls, the sandwiches. I've noticed it before. Nothing stingy about it. Good slices of ham between thick white bread, and the coffee's piping hot. Full cups, too. Good value. And I thought to myself, $6 bob will see this lot all right. And then I noticed my girl looking at the Air Force chap, sort of thoughtful-like, as though she might have seen him before. And then he looked at her, too. No, I couldn't blame him for that. I didn't mind either. When you're out with a girl, it gives you a kind of pride if other chaps notice her, you know? And you couldn't miss this one, not my girl. Then she turned her back on him, deliberate, and leaned with her elbows on the stall, sipping her hot coffee. And I stood beside her, doing the same. Now, we weren't stuck up or anything. We were pleasant, polite enough, and saying good evening all around, but anyone could tell that we were together. The girl and I. We were on our own. I liked that. Funny, it did something to me inside. It gave me a protective feeling. For all they knew, we might have been a married couple on our way home. They were chafing a bit, the other three, and the chap serving the sandwiches and tea, but we did join in. Hey, you want to watch out in that uniform, said the conductor, the Air Force fellow, or you'll end up like those others. It's late, too, to be out on your own. And they all started laughing. I didn't quite see the point, but I suppose it was a joke. Yeah, I've been awake a long time, said the Air Force fellow. I know a bad lot when I see one. Yeah, that's what the others ones said, too. I shouldn't wonder, remarked the driver. We know what happened to them, don't we? Makes you shudder. But why pick on Air Force? Air Force fellows like you. Why pick on the Air Force at all? That's what I want to know. That's the color of our uniform, said the fellow. You can spot it in the dark. Then the three of them went on laughing in that way. I didn't know what they're talking about, but I lighted up a cigarette. My girl wouldn't have one. Me, I blame the war for all that's gone wrong with the women, said the coffee stall bloke, wiping a cup and hanging it up behind. Telling a lot of them barmy, in my opinion. They don't know the difference between right or wrong. It isn't that. It's sport that's the trouble, said the conductor. Develops their muscles in that. What weren't never meant to be developed. You take my two youngsters, for instance. The girl can knock the boy down any time. She's a proper little bully. Makes you think. You know what? My boy saw a spider the other day, and she goes out there and stomps on it. She's that kind, you know. Yeah, that's right, agreed the driver. Equality of the sexes, they call it, don't they? It's the vote that did it. We ought never to give them the vote. Ah, gone, said the Air Force chap. Giving them the vote didn't turn the women barmy. They've always been the same under the skin. The people out east know how to treat them. They keep them shut up out there. That's the answer. Then you don't get any trouble. Well, I don't know what my old woman would say if I tried to shut her up, said the driver. And they all started laughing again. My girl plucked at my sleeve, and I saw she'd finished her coffee. She motioned with her head towards the street. You want to go home? Silly. I somehow wanted the others to believe we were going home. She didn't answer. She just went striding off, her hands in the pockets of her mac. I said good night, and I followed her. But not before I noticed the Air Force fellow staring after her over his cup of tea. She walked off along the street. It was still raining, dreary somehow. Made you want to be sitting over a fire somewhere snug. When she crossed the street and had come to the railings outside the cemetery, she stopped and she looked up at me and smiled. Well, what now? I said. Tombstones are flat, she said. Well, sometimes. And what if they are? I asked, bewildered like. You can lie down on them, she said. She turned and strolled along, looking at the railings. Then she came to one that was bent wide, and the next beside it was broken, and she glanced up at me and smiled again. It's always the same. You're bound to find a gap if you look long enough. She was through the gap in the railings as quick as a knife through butter. You could have knocked me flat. Here, hold on. I'm not as small as you. But she was off and away, wandering among the graves. I got through the gap, puffing and blowing a bit, and then I looked around, and bless me if she wasn't lying on a long, flat gravestone with her arms under her head and her eyes closed. Well, I wasn't expecting anything. I mean, it'd been in my mind to see her home and that. Date her up for the next evening. Of course, seeing as it was late, we could have stopped a bit when we came to the doorway of her place. She needn't have gone in right away. But lying there on the gravestone wasn't hardly natural, you know. I sat down and I took her hand. You'll get all wet lying there, I said. Feeble, but I didn't know what else to say. Yeah, I'm used to that, she said. She opened her eyes and looked at me. There was a street light not far away outside the railing, so it wasn't all that dark. And anyway, in spite of the rain, the night wasn't pitch black. It was more, I don't know, murky somehow. I wish I knew how to tell you about her eyes, but I'm not one for fancy talk. You know how one of those luminous watches shines in the dark? I've got one myself. When you wake up in the night and there it is on your wrist like a friend, Somehow my girl's eyes shone just like that. Oh, but they were lovely, too. And they weren't lazy like cat's eyes anymore. They were loving and gentle. And they were sad, too, all at the same time. What, you what, used to being wet, lying in the rain? Yeah, I was brought up to it. They gave us a name in the shelters. These dead-end kids, they used to call us in the war days. The dead-end kids. Weren't you never evacuated? Not me. I never could stop any place. I always came back. Were your parents living? No. No, both of them killed by the bomb that smashed my home. She didn't speak just tragic-like, just ordinary. Oh, bad luck, that, I said. She didn't answer that one. And I sat there holding her hand, wanting to take her home. You been on your job sometime at the picture house, then? I asked. Yeah, about 3 weeks. I don't stop anywhere long. I'll be moving on again soon. Why's that? Restless, she said. She put up her hand suddenly and she took my face and held it. It was gentle the way she did it, not as you'd think. You've got a good, kind face. I like it, she said. It was weird. The way she said it made me feel daft and soft, not sort of excited like I'd been in the bus, and I thought to myself, well, maybe this is it. Maybe I finally found a girl at last that I really want. But not for an evening, casual, for going steady. You got a bloke? I asked. No, she said. I mean regular. No, never. It was a funny line of talk to be having in a cemetery, and she lying there like some figure carved on the old tombstone. Yeah, well, I ain't got no girl neither. I never think about it the way other chaps do. Fatty, I guess. And then I'm keen on my job. I work in a garage, mechanic, repairs, anything that's going, good pay. I've saved a bit, besides what I send my old mum. I live in Diggs. Nice people, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, and my boss at the garage is a nice chap, too. I've never been lonely, and I'm not lonely now, but since I've seen you, it's made me think. It's not going to be the same anymore. She never interrupted me once. Somehow it was like speaking my thoughts out loud. Going home to the Thompsons is all very pleasant and nice, I said. You couldn't wish for kinder people. Good grub, too. We chat a bit after supper. We listen to the wireless. But what I want now is different. I want to come along and fetch you from the cinema when the program's over, and you'd be standing there, by the curtain, seeing the people out, and you'd give me a bit of a wink to show me you'd be going through to change your clothes, and I could wait for you, and then you'd come out in the street like you did tonight, but you wouldn't go off on your own. You'd take my arm, and if you didn't want to wear your coat, I'd carry it for you, or a parcel maybe, or whatever you had, and then we'd go off to the corner house or someplace for supper handy, and we'd have a table reserved, and they'd know us, and the waitress and them, and they'd keep back something special just for us. I could picture it too, clear as anything. The table with the ticket on reserved, the waitress nodding at us. Got curried eggs tonight, she'd say, and we going through to get our trays, and my girl acting like she didn't know me, and me laughing to myself. Do you see what I mean? I said, it's not just being friends, it's more than that. And I don't know if she heard me. She lay there looking up at me, though, touching my ear, my chin in that funny, gentle way. You'd say she was sorry for me. I'd like to buy you things, I said. Flowers sometimes. It's nice to see a girl with a flower tucked in her dress. It looks clean and fresh. And for special occasions, birthdays, Christmas, that. Something you'd seen in a shop window and you wanted, but you hadn't liked to go in and ask the price. A brooch, maybe, or a bracelet, or something pretty. I'd go in and I'd get it when you weren't with me, and it cost me much more than my week's pay, but I wouldn't mind. I could see the expression on her face, opening the parcel. And she'd put it on whatever I'd bought her, and we'd go out together, and she dressed up a bit for the purpose. Nothing glaring, I don't mean, but something that took the eye, saucy-like. It's not fair to talk about getting married, I said. Not in these days that everything's uncertain. A fellow doesn't mind the uncertainty, but it's hard on a girl, cooped up in a couple of rooms maybe, and queuing and rations and all that. They like their freedom and being in a job and not being tied down, same as us. But it's nonsense the way they were talking back at the coffee stall just now. Nonsense, I tell you. About the girls not being the same as in the old days. The war to blame. As for the way they treat them out east, yeah, I've seen it. I suppose that fellow meant to be funny. They're all smart Alex in that Air Force. It was a silly line of thought. Oh, silly line of talk, I thought. She dropped her hands to her side and closed her eyes. It was getting quite wet there on the tombstone. I was worried for her. Though she had her Mac, of course, but her legs and her feet were damp in her thin stockings and shoes. You weren't ever in that Air Force, were you? She said. Weird. Her voice had gone quite hard, sharp, different, like as if she was anxious about something and scared even. Me? Not me. No. I served my time with REME, you know. Proper lot they were, no swank, no nonsense. You know where you are with them. Good, I'm glad. You're good and you're kind, and I'm glad about that. I wonder if she'd known some fellow in the RAF who'd let her down. Now, they're a wild crowd, the RAF, the ones I've come across anyway. And I remember the way she looked at that boy drinking his tea at the stall, reflective somehow, as if she was thinking back. I couldn't expect her not to have been around a bit, with her looks, and then brought up to play above the shelters without parents, like she said. But I didn't want to think of her being hurt by anyone. Well, why? What's wrong with them? What's the RAF done to you? They smashed my home, she said. That was the Germans, not our fellows. It's all the same. They're killers, aren't they? I looked down at her, lying on the tombstone. Her voice wasn't hard anymore, like when she'd asked me if I'd been in the Air Force, but it was tired, sad, oddly lonely. And it did something queer to my stomach, you know, right in the pit of it, so that I wanted to do the darndest, silliest thing and take her home with me, back to where I lived with Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, and say to Mrs. Thompson, she was a kind old soul, she wouldn't mind, look, this is my girl, look after her. And then I'd know she'd be safe, she'd be all right. Nobody could do anything to hurt her. That was the thing I was afraid of suddenly, that someone would come along and hurt my girl. I bent down and put my arms around her and lifted her up close. Listen, I said, it's raining hard. I'm going to take you home. You'll catch your death lying here in the wet stone. No, she said, her hands on my shoulders. Nobody ever sees me home. You're going back where you belong. Alone. I won't leave you here. Yes, that's what I want you to do. If you refuse, I shall be angry. You wouldn't want that, would you? I stared at her, puzzled, and her face was queer in the murky old light, whiter than before, but it was beautiful. Christ, it was so beautiful. I know that's blasphemy, but I can't say it no other way. Well, what do you want me to do? I asked. I want you to go and leave me here and not look back, she said. You know, like someone dreaming, sleepwalking, they call it. Go back walking through the rain. It'll take you hours. It doesn't matter. You're young and strong. You've got your long legs. Go back to your room, wherever it is. Get in bed. Go to sleep. Wake. Have your breakfast in the morning. And go off to work, the same as you always do. Well, what about you? Never mind about me. Just go. Can I call for you at the cinema tomorrow night? Can it be like what I was telling you? You know, going steady like? She didn't answer. She only smiled at me. She sat quite still, looking in my face. Then she closed her eyes and threw back her head and said, Kiss me again, stranger. I left her, like she said. I didn't look back. I climbed through the railings of the cemetery out onto the road. No one seemed to be about. The coffee stall by the bus stop had closed down. The boards were up. I started walking the way the bus had brought us. The road was straight, going on forever. A high street it must have been. There were shops on either side and was right away northeast of London, nowhere I'd ever been before. Well, I was proper lost, but it didn't seem to matter. I felt like a sleepwalker, just as she had said. I kept thinking of her all the time. There was nothing else. Only her damned beautiful face in front of me as I walked. They had a word for it in the army when a girl gets a fellow that way, so he can't see straight or hear right or know what he's doing. And I thought it a lot of cock, only it happened to drunks. And now I knew it was true, and it happened to me. I wasn't going to worry anymore about how she'd get home. She told me not to. She must have lived handy, and she'd never ridden out so far else. It was funny living such away from her work. But maybe in time she'd tell me more. Maybe bit by bit. I wouldn't drag it from her. I had one thing fixed in my mind, and that was to pick her up the next evening from the picture palace. It was firm and set. Nothing would budge me from that. The hours in between would just be blank for me until 10 p.m. came around. I went on walking in the rain, and presently a lorry came along, and I thumbed the lift, and the driver took me a good part of the way before he had to turn left in the other direction. So I got down and I walked again. It must have been close on 3 when I got home. I would have felt bad in an ordinary way, knocking up Mr. Thompson to let me in. It never happened before either, but I was all lit up inside from loving my girl, and I didn't seem to mind. He came down at last and opened the door. I had to ring several times before he heard. And there he was, gray with sleep, poor old chap, his pajamas all crumpled from the bed. "Whatever happened to you?" he said. "We've been worried, my wife and me. We thought you'd been knocked down, run over. We came back here and we found the house empty, your supper not touched." "I went to the pictures," I said. "The pictures? Huh?" He stared up at me in the passageway. "The pictures stop at 10 o'clock, son." "I know. I went walking after that. I'm sorry. Good night." And I climbed up the stairs to my room, leaving the old chap muttering to himself, bolting the door, and I heard Mrs. Thompson calling from her bedroom. "What is it? Is it him? Is he home?" I put them to trouble and to worry, and I ought to have gone in there and apologized right then and there, but I couldn't somehow. It wouldn't have come out right. So I shut my door, I threw off my clothes, and I got into bed. It was like as if she was with me still, my girl, in the darkness. They were quite a bit quiet at breakfast the next morning, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. They didn't look at me. Mrs. Thompson gave me my kipper without a word, and then he went on looking at his newspaper. I ate my breakfast, and then I said, "I hope you had a nice evening up at Highgates." And Mrs. Thompson, with her mouth a bit tight, said, "Very pleasant, yes, thank you. We were home by 10. She gave a little sniff and poured Mr. Thompson out another cup of tea. We went on being quiet, no one saying a word. Then Mrs. Thompson said, "Will you be in to supper this evening?" And I said, "No, I don't think so. I'm meeting a friend." And then I saw the old chap look at me over his spectacles. "Well, if you're going to be late, we'd best take the key for you." And he went on reading his paper. You could tell they were proper hurt that I didn't tell them anything or say where I was going. Anyway, I went off to work. We were busy at the garage that day. One job after another came along, and any other time I wouldn't have minded. I liked a full day and often worked overtime, but today I wanted to get away before the shops all closed. I hadn't thought about anything else since the idea came into my mind. It was getting on for 4:30, and the boss came to me and said, "Yeah, Mac, I promised the doctor we'd have his Austin this morning and evening, all right? I said you'd be through with it by 7:30. That's okay, isn't it?" My heart sank. I'd counted on getting off early today because of what I wanted to do. But then I thought quickly that if the boss let me off now, I went out to the shop before it closed and came back again to do the job on the Austin, it would be all right. So I said, "Yeah, boss, I don't mind working a bit of overtime. I'd like to slip out for now. For half an hour. You're going to be here. There's something I want to buy before the shops shut up." He told me that suited him. So I took off my overalls, I washed, and I got my coat, and I went off to the line of shops down at the bottom of Haverstock Hill. I knew the one I wanted. It was a jeweler's, where Mr. Thompson used to take his clock to be repaired. And it wasn't a place where they sold trash at all, but good stuff, solid silver frames and that, and cutlery. There were rings, of course, and a few bangles. I didn't like to look at them. All the girls in the NAFI used to wear bangles with charms on them. Quite common it was. And I went on staring in at the window, and then I spotted it. I spotted it right at the back. It was a brooch. It's quite small. Not much bigger than your thumbnail, really, but with a nice blue stone on it and a pin at the back. It was shaped like a heart. That was what got me, the heart, the shape of it. I stared at it a bit. There wasn't a ticket to it, which meant it would cost a bit. But I went in and I asked to have a look at it. The jeweler got it out of the window for me, and he gave it a bit of a polish. He turned it this way and that, and I saw it pinned on my girl. Showed up nice on her frock or her jumper, and I knew this was it. I'll take it, I said. Then I asked him the price. I swallowed a bit when he told me. I took out my wallet and I counted the notes. He put the heart in a box wrapped up careful with a cotton wool, and he made a neat little package out of it. He tied it with fancy string. I knew I'd have to get an advance from the boss before I went off work that evening. He was a good chap, and I was certain he'd give it to me. So I stood outside the jeweler's there with the packet for my girl safe in my breast pocket, and I heard the church clock strike 5:15. It was time to slip down to the cinema and make sure she understood about the date for the evening, and then I'd have to beat it fast up the road. And get back to the garage and all, and then I'd have the Austin done by the time the doctor wanted it. Well, when I got down to the cinema, my heart was beating like a sledgehammer, and I could hardly swallow, I tell you. I kept picturing to myself how she'd look, my girl, standing there by the curtains going in, with the velvet jacket, the cap on the back of her head, and those eyes. Oh, those gorgeous blue eyes. Anyway, there's a bit of a queue outside, and I saw they'd changed the program. A poster of the Westerner gone, with the cowboy throwing a knife in the Indian's guts. They had instead a lot of girls dancing, and some chap prancing in front of them with a walking stick. It was a musical. I went in. I didn't go near the box office, but I looked straight to the curtains where she'd be. And there was an usherette there, all right. Yeah, it was an usherette, all right, but it wasn't her. This was a great tall girl who looked silly in the clothes. Who was trying to do two things at once: tear off the slips of tickets that the people went past and hang onto a torch at the same time. I waited a moment. Perhaps they'd switched over positions and my girl had gone up to the circle. When the last lot had got in through the curtains and there was a pause and she was free, I went up to her and I said, "Hey, excuse me, do you know where I could have a word with the other young lady?" She looked at me. "What other young lady?" "The one who was here last night with the copper hair." She looked at me closer than suspicious like. Yeah, well, she hasn't shown up today. I'm taking her place." "Not showing up?" "No. And it's funny you should ask. You're not the only one, you know. The police was here not long ago. They had a word with the manager, the commissionaire, too. And no one said anything to me yet, but I think there's been trouble." My heart beat different then. Not excited. Bad. Like when someone's ill, took to hospital, and sudden. "The police. What were they here for?" "I told you I don't know. But it was something to do with her. And the manager went with them to the police station. He hasn't come back yet." "This way, please. Circle on the left, stalls to the right." I just stood there, not knowing what to do. It was like as if the floor had been knocked away from under me. The tall girl tore another slip off a ticket, and then she said to me over her shoulder, "Well, was she a friend of yours?" "Yeah. Well, sort of." I didn't know what to say. "Yeah, well, if you ask me, she was queer in the head, you know. It wouldn't surprise me if she'd done away with herself and they'd found her dead. No, ice cream served in the interval, after the newsreel." I went out and stood in the street. The queue was growing for the cheaper seats. And there were children, too, talking excited. I brushed past them and I started walking up the street, and I felt sick inside, weird. Something had happened to my girl. I knew it now. That was why she wanted to get rid of me last night, for me not to see her home. She was going to do herself in, right there in the cemetery. That's why she talked funny and looked so white. And now they'd found her, lying there in that gravestone by the railings. I just knew it. If I hadn't gone away and left her, she'd have been all right. If I'd have stayed with her just 5 minutes longer, coaxing her, I'd have got her around to my way of thinking and seen her home, standing no nonsense. And she'd be at the picture palace now, showing people to their seats. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't as bad as what I feared. Maybe she was found wandering, lost her memory, and got picked up by the police and taken off. Then they found out where she worked and that. And now the police wanted to check up with the manager at the cinema to see if it was so. Yeah. If I went down to the police station and I asked them there, maybe they'd tell me what had happened, and I could say she was my girl, and we were walking out, and it wouldn't matter if she didn't recognize me. Then I'd stick to the story. I couldn't let down my boss. I had to get that job done in the Austin. But afterwards, when I'd finished, I'd go down to the police station. Yeah. All the heart had gone out of me. I went back to the garage, hardly knowing what I was doing. For the first time ever, the smell of the place turned my stomach. The oil and the grease. And there was a chap roaring up his engine, before backing out his car. There was a great cloud of smoke coming from his exhaust, filling the workshop with stink. I went and I got my overalls. I put them on and I fetched the tools and I started on the Austin. And all the time I was wondering what it was that happened to my girl. If she was down at the police station, lost and lonely, or if she was lying somewhere, dead. I kept seeing her face all the time like it was last night. Last night alone in the graveyard. Yeah, the cops will buy that all right. It took me an hour and a half, not more, to get the Austin ready for the road, filled up with petrol and all, and I had her facing outwards to the street for the owner to drive out. But I was all in by then, dead tired, the sweat pouring down my face. I had a bit of a wash. I put on my coat, and I felt the package in the breast pocket. I took it out and I looked at it. Done so neat with a fancy ribbon. I put it back in again. I hadn't noticed the boss come in. I was standing with my back to the door. "Hey, yeah, so did you get what you wanted then, man?" He said, all cheerful like and smiling. He was a good chap, my boss, never out of temper. We got along well. Yeah, I did, I said. I didn't want to talk about it. I told him the job was done when the Austin was ready to drive away. I went to the office with him so that he could note down the work done and the overtime, and he offered me a fag from the packet lying on his desk beside the evening paper. "Yeah, I see Lady Luck won 330. I'm a couple of quid up this week." He was entering my work in his ledger to keep the payroll right. "Yeah, good for you," I said. "Yeah, I only backed it for a place like a clot," he said. "She was 25-1. Still, it's all in the game." I didn't answer. Me, I'm not one for drinking, like I said, but I needed one bad just then. I mopped my forehead with my handkerchief. I wish he'd get on with the figures and say good night and let me go. "Ah, yeah. Look at that, won't you? Another poor devil's had it in. Yeah, that's the third guy now in 3 weeks. Ripped right up the guts, same as the others. He died in the hospital this morning. Looked like there's a hoodoo on the RAF." "Yeah, what was it?" I asked. "Flying the jets or something?" "Jets? No, damn it. Murder. Ain't you paying attention? He was sliced up the belly. Poor sod. Don't you never read the papers, boy? It's a third man in 3 weeks, done identical, all Air Force fellas. Each time they found him near a graveyard or a cemetery." I was saying just now to that chap who came in for petrol, there's not only men who go off their rockers and turn sex maniacs, but women too. They'll get this one all right, though, you see. It says in the paper they have a line on her. They expect an arrest shortly. About time, too, before another poor blighter cops it. I took a deep swallow. He shut up his ledger and he stuck his pencil behind his ear. "Hey, you like a drink? I've got a bottle of gin in the cupboard." "Yeah, no, thanks very much. I've got a date." "That's right. Yeah, you go enjoy yourself, right?" So I walked down the street and I bought an evening paper. It's like what he said about the murder. They had it on the front page. They said it must have happened about 2 a.m. Young fellow in the Air Force in northeast London. He managed to stagger to a call box and get through to the police. They found him there on the floor of the box when they arrived. He made a statement in the ambulance before he died. He said a girl called to him and he followed her. He thought it was just a bit of love-making, you know. He'd seen her with another fellow drinking coffee at a stall a little while before, and he thought she'd thrown this other fellow over and taken a fancy to him. And then she got him, he said. Bam, right in the guts. He said in the paper he'd given the police a full description of her. He said also the police would be glad if the man who had been seen with the girl early in the evening would come forward to help in identification. Shy. I don't want to read that paper no more. I threw it away. I walked about the streets till I was tired. When I guessed Mr. and Mrs. Thompson had gone to bed, I went home. I groped for the key they'd left on a piece of string hanging inside the letter box. I let myself in. I went upstairs to my room. Good old Mrs. Thompson had turned down the bed and put a thermos of tea for me, thoughtful like, in the evening paper, the late edition. I picked up the paper. They'd got her all right, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I didn't read the writing, nor the name, nor anything. I sat down on my bed. I took up the paper. And there was my girl staring up at me from the front page. And I took the package from my coat and I undid it. I threw away the wrapper and the fancy string. And I just sat there, looking down at the little heart I held in my hand.